It is important to note that with the exception of some television news footage, all video in this documentary is amateur, being shot by citizens of the Prescott area. With its small-town atmosphere and cool pine forests, the mile-high city of Prescott, Arizona is a desirable and growing community. With Prescott's growth, urban forest interface has put upscale subdivisions with their luxury homes deep into the ponderosa pines that border the surrounding Prescott National Forest. May 2002. Continuing drought conditions and high winds set the stage for what was to be the most damaging forest fire to date for the city of Prescott, Arizona. Only 3/4 of an inch of precipitation in the last 5 months has left the surrounding Prescott National Forest a tinderbox. The trees in the forest have less moisture than kiln-dried lumber. Newspapers, radio, and television repeat warnings that this could be the worst fire season ever. Smoking restrictions and campfire bans have been in effect since April. On the afternoon of May 15th, smoke was spotted near Indian Creek Campground in the Prescott National Forest. With high winds and explosively dry timber, the situation quickly grew into a Type 1 forest fire that would eventually require the efforts of at least 28 firefighting agencies and 13 hotshot crews to contain. It was named the Indian Fire. Flames raced through the dry pine forest, jumping Highway 89 at least twice. The winds were pushing the fire straight towards the city of Prescott, 3 miles to the north. Immediately, the emergency call went out, and within hours, firefighters and emergency crews from all over the United States began to pour into the area. Type 1 hotshot crews, dozens of fire departments, law enforcement agencies, the Red Cross. The National Guard was activated. An incident commander was needed, and Van Bateman, a fire management officer from Arizona's Coconino National Forest, was brought in. His experience with Type 1 incident teams made him a logical choice to head up the army of resources rapidly filling Prescott streets. Things had to happen quickly because by sunset of the first day, for the first time in the city's history, a forest fire was inside the city limits, and it was beginning to take homes. The Red Cross Evacuation Center was set up at Prescott Mile High Middle School as over 2,000 frightened residents were forced to leave their homes.
Prescott and Central Yavapai fire districts. There are at least 4 to 5 air tankers in the air. More are on the way, according to Gary Whitman, and they're trying to get as many assets as possible to fight this blaze, which is dangerously close to the Prescott area, basically within Prescott at this point. So, Highway 89 South is closed. Don't go anywhere near it, folks. It is closed originally at Ponderosa Park. I imagine that area is now extended a little bit in both directions, Don't even go in that area. Stay away from that area, even if you live in...
While wildland firefighters manned the main fire line, municipal fire departments took position around threatened neighborhoods. The city restricted the use of water outdoors to ensure adequate water pressure for fighting structure fires. Ash and embers rained down on the city, creating the fear of inner-city fires, and by Thursday morning ash was drifted in street curbs of downtown Prescott. Manpower and equipment were streaming into Prescott as the enormous cloud of smoke darkened the sky overhead. The event would see over 1,000 firefighters, many dozens of fire engines and ground vehicles, 7 air tankers, and 5 helicopters, including heli-tac crews. These would come from at least 28 different agencies around the country. At the north of Prescott, the city's municipal airport is home to a facility that played a large part in stopping the Indian Fire, the Henry Y. H. Kim Fire Center. To carry out its role in the National Emergency Response System, this center combines an aviation program, an incident coordination and communication center, a fire cache, a hotshot crew, a heli-tac crew, an air tanker base, a fire and emergency incident training program, and a business management department which supports all of the center's functions. With the additional air tankers and helicopters flown in, massive firefighting capabilities were put into action. Hundreds of tons of retardant and water were dropped by these amazing aircraft. May 15th, 3:02 p.m. Aircraft launched. Tankers had an amazing turnaround time of 16 to 20 minutes. The tankers follow a smaller lead plane mere feet above the ground and through smoke and mountain canyons to drop their load on target.
Yeah, I listen to the scanner a lot, and I was listening to their what they call the air show, and where they position the planes. They've got one plane up there that is he's the boss of the sky up there. He's called Air Attack, and he's in orbit above everybody else, and he's got to know where everybody is and tell them where to go. News choppers, when they check into the area, they have to check in with him, and he tells them what altitude to fly at and where they can be. And it's pretty impressive listening to all of the coordination that they do. And they've got the lead plane, which leads the tankers in. He makes a show-me run, so he'll fly down and show them exactly where to put the slurry. They overlap that last one, halfway, and then go on by that little rocky peak over there, and they'll fly down, drop it. He'll say, hey, that's exactly where I wanted it, Then they've got the helicopters up there that he's got to keep track of. I'm sure he has to know where the guys on the ground are. He's got a lot of frequencies there that radio frequencies that he has to keep track of. But he's, the ground, the helicopters, the slurry planes, the lead plane, the news choppers. So he's got a pretty good job, and I was really impressed with how he knew everything that was going on and how everybody else would check on with him. The news choppers would say, I want to go over to the dip site, check that out. He'd say, okay, after this next plane comes through, he says, you're free to go over there, but be sure and tell them you're in the area. He'd always say that,
I've never seen anything like it. There was a slurry bomber on both sides, left, right side of Thumb Butte. They'd go 16 minutes, they'd drop a load, they came back. I worked for the Forest Service for 3 years. I worked for Heber, Prescott, and Wasatch Hot Shots, and I've never seen anything like it.
Okay, let me see, on May the 15th, I believe, about 1:45, we were all at the fire center doing some training here, and Spruce Mountain Lookout called in a medium gray smoke coming up from the Indian Creek Campground area. All units on the Prescott responded. Helicopter 332 responded as the helicopter got up over the hill, off the deck here and over the hill, and we started pulling out. We could see that small gray column was building rapidly into a large black smoke. At that point, we knew we were going to have a fire on our hands. Ordered a couple of the air tankers right out of the base before we even got on scene, knowing that we're probably going to have a large fire. Drove in, took us about 20 minutes to get on scene. I think we got in there about 10 after 3. Myself and Todd Rhines pulled up and realized that we had a pretty good fire starting to establish. The helicopter came over about 2 minutes later and said he had somewhere between 5 and 8 acres, and the fire was spotting. It looks like it was going to spot down into a drainage about 200 yards ahead of the fire. If it got established in that drainage, it really had the potential to get up and move. Well, at that point, as we came around the corner, it did get established in that drainage, and it was up and moving. At that point, we knew immediately that Ponderosa Park was going to be threatened. So our tactic was to try to turn the corner there using the air tankers and the helicopter away from Ponderosa Park. Myself, Todd Rhines, Duggar Hughes, and Robert Morales all sat down quick, along with Chief Willis. Dave Curtis came up with a plan of attack. What we're going to try to do is box it in along the roads of 89, Ponderosa Park Road, and Indian Springs Campground, using the air tankers and firing to see if we could get it boxed in and hold it. We knew at that point we'd have at least 100 acres. Everything was going into place. The fire was moving rapidly, 100 to 120 chains an hour, about a mile and a half an hour, and that's just by getting with it in the Ponderosa Pine. Karen started the fire operation on the corner. We made it about 200 yards, 250 yards, and Air Attack reported over the top of us. Greg Davis reported over the top of us. It looked like it had spotted over 89. At that point, Ernie Del Rio, the district ranger, also shows up, and Ernie was in there. We did a quick analysis. We use a complexity analysis to determine, how complex the fire would be. We immediately knew that doing the complexity analysis that we needed a Type 2 incident management team. As soon as Greg Davis reported that it jumped over the highway there and it was being established, I looked at Ernie Del Rio, the district ranger, and we did the complexity analysis again along with Robert Morales, and determined that a Type 1 team, incident management team, was going to be needed to handle this fire. and at that point notified law enforcement that we needed to start evacuating everything out in front of it. Jim Clausen, our LEO, was sitting there. Jim contacted Police Department, Sheriff's Department, and the evacuation started. First evacuation we knew that would be threatened would be Cathedral Pines, because we did turn the corner successfully to herd it out of Ponderosa Park. So Ponderosa Park was a voluntary evacuation. Everything else out ahead of the fire was a mandatory evacuation. Jim gave me the all clear about 35 minutes later that everything out ahead of it was done. At that point, we were trying to establish an anchor point. Todd Rhines, at that point, we set up an incident command post. I assumed the incident commander. Todd Rhines assumed the operations sections chief. Todd immediately got up into the helicopter to determine where it was going. Coordination with air tankers and helicopters, the heavy helicopters, we realized it was heading for Cathedral Pines. We, at that point, talked with Chief Willis and Chief Curtis from Central Yavapai, City of Prescott, and said we needed additional structure protection engines to start getting into Cathedral Pines to make a stand at the structures. Talking to Greg Davis, he was saying that about this time the fire was probably 100 to 150 acres, with somewhere about a quarter to a half a mile flame front on it. We knew at that point that we had the potential for it to come all the way into Prescott. The thing about this that was organized is that we, since 1990, for 12 years, have sat as agencies, Central Yavapai, City of Prescott, Forest Service, State Lands, Yavapai County Emergency Services, have drilled just for a fire like this. We have done tabletop drills, we've done live drills, we've done simulation drills, and the orchestration of all of that came together. Everybody knew their job. We knew the game plan, the jobs that were needed to be executed, and everybody got into it. The City of Prescott and Central Yavapai structure engines did their structure protection, Forest Service did the vegetation work, and it all came together well. So as far as the incident management team that we put together in-house, it was the same guys that have been practicing this for 12 years. It really went off well. There was just some great work. Once the fire had hit the brush crush on the top of the ridge there at Cathedral Pines, it lost a bunch of its sting. But then there was some spotting out ahead of it that actually spotted down in the drainage, I believe, and established another small head that came up and took that first house at Cathedral Pines. Once that first house got involved, the next house and the next house, City of Prescott and Central Yavapai firefighters knew that they needed to make a stand in there. So they were in there letting the main head of the fire come through, and as it came through, they were picking up any structures that were involved. Some of the interesting things were as the fire was approaching, we were getting notifications from people had reloading black powder and all kinds of stuff in their houses. So there were all kinds of little interesting side stories. The thing about it, the structure fire guys that night, once the main sting of the fire came through, hit the ridge and then hit the burn in black or jack pine, lost a bunch of it. We were able to get in, and they actually saved one of the structures because the main contingency front of the fire had gone through. They lost a lot of the heat. And the guys came in and saved the structures. Considering all things, losing 5 structures is still a great loss, but we could have had 500 structures. The whole deciding factor in the fire is a couple of things. Number one is the time of day that it hit the ridge, the actual vegetation treatment that was done with our brush crushing and our burning, all the work, the 12 years of preparation of everybody coming together and knowing what their job was, the frequency management stuff that we'd already talked about for 12 years, all of that stuff paid off large dividends for the community of Prescott because it all came together at one time, and it's usually an organized confusion, some people explain it as. This time, if you looked at the radio or listened to the radio, it was very calm, it was very very well orchestrated from everybody in all the departments. It was truly a cooperative effort. We have become so independent, or I should say co-independent as agencies, City of Prescott, Central Yavapai, and the Forest Service, that we depend on each other for everything. And the success of that was those agencies all coming together and fighting this fire and getting around it as quick as we did, keeping it as small as we did, even though we did lose some structures. No one likes to lose structures or land in their home forest, me included. And I'm glad that the agencies had practiced. I'm glad that we took proactive. I'm understanding more and more that the community now is taking a more positive approach, and clean the vegetation around their homes, and we're not out of the woods yet. We're still lined up for for other fires south of town. We're going to continue our burning operations. We're going to continue our mechanical treatments and try to keep the south end of town as safe as possible.
Oh, about 6 or 7 years ago, my brother was active on the Wildland Urban Interface Commission, and he invited me to some of their meetings, and we had talked about defensible space and what would happen if there was a huge forest fire. Knowing that our properties were on the forest boundary, concerned about clearing all the brush, and we went through a lot of different methods, just pruning and then chainsawing, and we discovered how quickly it grew back, and we just got more and more aggressive on it. Last year in April, the Forest Service, I guess, got some money after the Los Alamos fire, and started clearing out 700 acres right here. They took down everything with the big brush crusher that was 6 inches and smaller. They had 2 track hoes with like a giant weed eater on the end of it, and then they had 2 small caterpillars with the big bush hog on the front of those. I went over and talked to the equipment operator and asked him if they'd do my property, and he said get a hold of my boss in Oregon, and I gave him a phone call, and he says, well, how far do I have to move my heavy equipment? And I said, an inch over the property line, and he said fine. And so we struck a deal, and he came in, and one day he did about 6 acres. They knew that this area right here would be the most vulnerable, since it's on the very south end of town and the winds are always blowing to the northeast, that if anything started out there, they needed at least a half a mile to a 3/4 mile break. And when the fire came roaring up over that far ridge, with all the hot air lift and going up, it went across the road up there, Quartz Mountain Road, and came down into the valley, and then it was still burning so hot you can still see the pine needles, the charred pine needles are still down in that canyon there, and all the spotting went to all the tops of these hills and started up some of that ground mulch, and then the slurry bombers, they had made a big slurry line right along the forest line here. Once it got right to that, it just died down. And right along here.
That's the fire line right there, huh?
Fire line. Yeah. And it came right up to the red line right along here. So it kept making red lines this way. Once it hit that slurry, this stuff just kind of laid down.
This was hot to burn it down to bare earth like this.
Yeah, it was.
Because there isn't even any stumps right here.
Yeah, not as thick.
The Indian fire came to within 100 feet of Dr. Collison's home. The residence has a swimming pool with a high-pressure pump and fire hose that can be used to fight fires. With that, and the extensive land clearing, firefighters even decided to use the doctor's property as a staging area for men and equipment.
And Greg Davis is his name, and he came up and said, most often I don't get to see, my shots later from the ground, what I called. And he came up here and he was going like, he says at about 7:30 it started to break through the canyon here, and we did another slurry line because we were afraid it was going to get down into Timber Ridge.
Many attribute Dr. Collison's foresight and preparations to saving more homes and properties in the neighborhood. The Indian fire even had effects on the community that no one could have predicted.
You can solve Cowpen Ford's slurry worries. While fighting the Indian fire, a loaded slurry bomber accidentally covered all of Cowpen's cars and trucks with a blanket of red. Now these slightly damaged new and used cars and trucks are discounted. On most new vehicles, save thousands off sticker price. On pre-owned, save hundreds off Kelley Blue Book. With every car and truck sold, Cowpen will donate $100 to the American Red Cross to help defray the cost of the area's recent disaster. Save big during the slurry sale at Cowpen Ford Lincoln Mercury Mazda in Prescott.
More than 1,000 people forced to flee their homes from the Indian fire are back home tonight. For some, going home is tough, though, because they have nothing to go home to. TV5's John Brodsky has a story of one family who lost absolutely everything.
Diana, today they got to see what happened to their home firsthand for the first time. Other former evacuees returned home to some happy reunions today, while Prescott families on one street are starting over. This is Quiet Pines Lane after the fire.
7, I'll come back.
For a few days, firefighters outnumbered residents after 5 homes burned.
We just got here 15 to 20 minutes ago.
And this is what Mark and Veronica Riegner found.
It looks like a grave, basically, a grave of a house that we had come to love. We actually designed it and worked a lot on it ourselves, helped build it. So there's a lot of emotional value that's put into this house.
Their 2 sons' backyard playground equipment is still standing. Their home, a total loss. But they're thankful for their community.
There's been like so much support for us that we're just uplifted by that.
Right next to where one home was partially burned, the neighbors are totally fine. And here are a few reasons why. Stucco walls and a tile roof. During the fire, firefighters came through and actually cut some trees away. And earlier, the family had cleared brush from their yard.
Well, we love the forest.
And they're surprised the fire spared so many trees around their home.
But we're hopeful that maybe, we can rebuild here, because from what we had imagined, we thought it was going to be a moonscape here.
A handful of neighbors suffered the same fate. They now know firsthand the power of the nature that surrounds them.
It's like a dream, just 2 days ago we were looking at the fire going, oh, it will never come here. But yeah, it's amazing what has happened.
The Riegners are also thankful that they do have insurance for their home. They say that they're going to probably stay in a rental property at least for a while. They had seen on television what they thought was their home burning on Wednesday night. The fire department then confirmed for them that it was their home, so that took at least a little bit of the shock away. Live in Prescott, John Brodsky, TV5 News.
Here's the latest on the Indian fire. Firefighters say it has burned about 1,322 acres. They have the fire 85% contained at this point. If the weather remains favorable, firefighters are optimistic they can have full containment by tomorrow.
By Friday, May 17th, all evacuees returned home. By Saturday evening, an amazingly short 3 days after smoke was spotted, the Indian fire was contained. 1,360 acres of national forest had burned. Prescott had lost 5 homes and 2 outbuildings in a fire that caused $1.5 million in structure damage and cost almost $3 million to fight. 5 homes lost, but hundreds saved by the amazingly coordinated efforts of an army of firefighters and firefighting equipment. At this time, the cause of the blaze is considered suspicious and is under investigation. Good fortune shined on Prescott those 3 days. Simply put, the enormous firefighting resources were available. Had there been many other major wildfires burning in the western United States, these resources would have been spread thin, leaving Prescott vulnerable to what can only be imagined.
Prescott got very lucky here. I mean,
Yeah.
The fire stopped when it got to the edge of town, basically, you know, and they caught it there. If they wouldn't have caught it there, ooh.
Oh, it would have. I was right at the edge. I was evacuated. I was right at the edge there. You know,
It's just surprising that it didn't go into town deeper. Because especially when you start looking at the houses around here, I mean, you know, the houses are built right in the woods, you know, and there's brush all the way around it. Especially when you drive on the freeway on, what's that, 69 there?
Yeah.
And you look up and you see those houses on the steep side slope.
Oh, yeah.
With, you know,
at 89.
slope running up all the way to their house.
That's where I'm working with a hoe over there. The back
And those people are the ones that really, because fire runs uphill. When it hits the top of the hill, then it'll go over the top, send embers over the top, and then burn up the backside. So those ridge houses are up on a ridge are really vulnerable to fire.
So the fire actually likes to go uphill rather than down.
Yes.
Probably the
It'll
wind
go
is
faster uphill than it will go down.
Huh.
Depending on the wind. Wind
Sure.
is like what fire's okay. You know, fire is fire, but it has to have wind.
Like right now.
As an accelerant,
now.
yeah.
Right. Once you get the wind involved in it, then it'll take off and do some runs. Or what a fire can do is create its own, like in Yellowstone, create its own weather and move at the whims of its own weather.
For years untold, it fired yearly. Now it's old, but we loved it dearly. The truth be told, we lost it nearly. But for the boy who saved it all, drop a load on Indian fire, grab a hold, no time to tire. We the devil's iron, and we drop a load on Indian fire. Here's to the brave, don't fall to dying with some pretty fancy flying. And on the ground, would not stop trying to hold the line and save it all. Now drop a load on Indian fire, grab a hold, no time to tire. We'll pull out the devil's eye when you drop low